So in November 2016, I was having lunch with a friend who was dreading Thanksgiving. The country had just elected a new president, and she was concerned that the holiday dinner was going to erupt into a political war zone. She told me about an article that she had read in the Washington Post, I believe, that had a title like "Surviving Thanksgiving When You Can't Stand How Your Family Voted." Later that day, I went and looked it up on Google, and I found it. But I was surprised to find also that an entire genre had emerged on this theme of surviving Thanksgiving dinner amidst political disagreement. In the intervening year, the genre has exploded. That's 21 million hits on Google for surviving Thanksgiving politics. Now, many of these articles offer pretty solid advice: remain calm, don't call names, try to understand the other person's perspective. However, a good portion of them close with the following message: hey, sometimes it's just too hard. Sometimes it's just not even worth the attempt to get along with your family. And in those cases, stay home. Skip Thanksgiving. So what to make of this? Now, I'm a political philosopher, and my work focuses mainly on moral and political disagreement and the role of disagreement in democratic society. You can judge those books by their covers. In this work, I've taken a view that is pretty popular among political philosophers. And that view is that democracy is a 24/7 job. The way to do democracy well is to do it perpetually. And if we find that democracy has any troubles or problems, there's always the solution of more democracy. I've since changed my mind about that, and I want to talk to you a little bit today about why my mind has changed and how. My view now is that there are some problems that democracy faces where the solution is not to do more democracy, but in fact, sometimes we need to do less democracy. Now, that might sound heretical to you, so let me explain what I mean. There are some goods that can be realized only when we pursue something else. If you want a simple example, consider fun. It's good to have fun, right? However, the surest way to fail at fun is to make having fun the point of your activity. When you make fun the object of what you're doing, you bore yourself. That's because fun is a byproduct. It's a good that comes and emerges out of activities that have something else as their point. Feeling the plunge of the roller coaster, telling the story, dancing to the song, listening to the music. If you want another example, consider something else that seems to be going on in this picture: friendship. It's good to have friends. We need friends. However, again, the surest way to fail at friendship is to make friendship the point of all of your interpersonal interactions. When you set out in engaging with others to make friends, when that becomes the point of what you do with others all the time, you wind up alienating people. You seem creepy to them. You try too hard, and you wind up alone. Now, I want to suggest that democracy has a similar structure. That is, I want to suggest to you that democracy, like fun and friendship, is the kind of thing that can flourish only when sometimes we do things together that have no political dimension to them at all. In a slogan that by now will be familiar to you, in order to do democracy well, we need to put politics in its place. Now, putting politics in its place is very, very difficult because, after all, our social world is saturated with calls to our political allegiances and loyalties. And more than that, in ways that are not always obvious to us, our everyday activies, For example, where you buy your coffee, the last time you went to a local park, what movies you watch, what radio stations you listen to, how you get to work. These are all features that are largely conditioned by your political profile. And what that means is that your casual encounters with others, online, for example, when you're buying your coffee, are increasingly likely to occur only among people who politically are just like you. Now, there's all kinds of reasons, which I'll go through in a moment, to suggest that, or which suggest that ongoing social interactions among like-minded people creates problems for democracy. In order to see it, though, I want to start with something that's kind of familiar to us: political polarization. It's not hard to find people complaining about this on the news every night. And it's a familiar phenomenon. It's the dropping out of the middle ground between people. It's two opposed political or ideological groups that have nothing in common, and so therefore are not able to cooperate and often not even able to productively communicate. We know that disagreement of this kind is bad for democracy because it creates deadlock. And we know that one of the things that democracy has to do in order to be successful is do things, get stuff done. But there's another phenomenon that's also called polarization, which might be not familiar to you, but I think is in some ways more disconcerting. This is a phenomenon that occurs not among two different politically opposed groups, but inside like-minded groups. That is to say, if we think that disagreement is a problem for democracy, agreement might be even worse. Here's why. A phenomenon called group polarization is the statistical regularity, which has been found across groups of all kinds, not just political groups. It is the phenomenon according to which like-minded people, when they get together to talk about the issues that they agree about, in the course of their discussion, each member of the group comes to hold a more extreme version of the view that he or she held before the conversation began. In a nutshell, group polarization is the regularity that discussion among like-minded others turns us into more extreme versions of ourselves. Now, that might strike you as disconcerting because it looks like it's often imperceptible. We don't see it happening to ourselves. However, what's even more disconcerting is that the group polarization phenomenon is not driven by the introduction of new reasons or evidence or arguments. We become more extreme versions of ourselves simply due to social pressures. What's problematic about that, for democracy, is that group polarization kicks into gear a broader dynamic. As we talk to like-minded people, or only to like-minded people, we become more extreme versions of ourselves. And as we become more extreme versions of ourselves, we also come to increasingly depersonalize and demonize the people with whom we disagree. As we demonize and depersonalize the people with whom we disagree, moreover, we become increasingly unable to hear nuance in the other side's views. That is, as we become more extreme versions of ourselves, we become more inclined to see the people with whom we disagree as the extremists. And because we start seeing the people with whom we disagree as extremists, we become increasingly unable to see those people as the kind of people it makes sense to even try to have a civil, rational conversation with. That is to say, the saturation of our social lives with politics sets us up for group polarization. And group polarization sets us up for political polarization with a disconcerting add-on. Not only do we have opposed political groups that can't talk to each other because there's no common ground, we also have opposed political groups that can't talk to each other, each of whom is convinced that the people on the other side are not worth talking to. So that's not only deadlock, that's a recipe for a politics based in animosity, distrust, and antagonism. It's a huge problem for democracy when democracy can't get anything done and, moreover, is driven by distrust, animosity. What can be done? Well, let's think for a moment about what democracy is. Now, we tend to think that democracy is simply a system of government where we each get a vote, each one gets one vote, and the majority rules. And democracy is that. But it's more than that. Democracy is the ideal of self-government among political equals. That is to say, democracy doesn't happen merely in the voting booth. Democracy happens in the moments before you go to cast your vote, when you talk to other people about how you might cast your vote, when you enter into conversations with them about the political structure of the country at the moment. Democracy exists in conversations and disagreements and arguments with your fellow citizens about the structure of our shared political world. Now, what that means is that if we're going to see democracy as this ideal of self-government among equals, there's going to be disagreement. And where there's disagreement, there's the challenge of disagreeing respectfully and civilly. The group polarization phenomenon erodes that ability, the ability to disagree civilly and respectfully together. How can it be built? Well, I want to suggest that democracy, understood as this ideal of self-government among equals, requires in us not merely to inform ourselves about the issues, to think hard about the political questions of the day, but also to cultivate within ourselves a series of skills and dispositions and habits that will enable us to regard even those with whom we disagree about the most important things, to regard those people nonetheless as our fellow citizens, as equal sharers in political power. I want to call this set of dispositions and skills civic friendship. Civic friendship is different from ordinary friendship in many respects, but I think it has a similar structure to ordinary friendship. That is, I want to suggest to you that civic friendship is the kind of relation that is smothered when all we do together is civics. Civic friendship is the kind of thing that's derailed when every social interaction is tinged with or aimed at something political. If we want to cultivate civic friendship, that is, we have to cultivate within ourselves, or we have to engage with others in activities that have some other point than self-government. Now, you might think that it's difficult to cultivate civic friendship, and you're right, because go back to a couple of slides ago. Our worlds are already structured by our political allegiances. How can we find some things to do together that don't already have politics as a pollutant within them? Well, it's a big problem. Sometimes big problems call for big solutions, but not always. Sometimes the right approach to take when you're confronting a big problem is to start with something small. Let's go back to Thanksgiving dinner. Around the country, Thanksgiving dinners are governed by a rule of etiquette that I'll call Mom's maxim. Don't argue politics at the dinner table. It's a good rule. It tells us suppress political differences so that you can make it through a holiday dinner. Here's a slightly different conception, though. And note, in thinking small, what I'm suggesting is not that we do something different, but that we think about what we're doing in a slightly different way. Here's an alternative maxim, and you won't find this in any of the 21 million Google hits. Something is more important than politics, like family dinner. Note, that elicits from us the same kind of behavior as Mom's maxim, but it's a value judgment. It doesn't tell us to suppress our political differences. It tells us to rise above them. And that's an important difference, even if the behavior might be the same. Now, the very thought that there could be something more important than politics is oddly foreign to us. But ask yourself, what is politics for? Because if politics is for something, the idea that something is more important than politics shouldn't be so foreign. That's what politics is for. Valuable human relationships, caring relationships, loving relationships, neighborly relationships, relationships of friendship, support, vulnerability, dependency, solidarity. We're interested in getting politics right because we're interested in what's going on in this picture. People living lives of value together, devoted to aims, aspirations, and projects that are not about politics, but are about other things, living well together. If we can't get politics right, we lose this. And the idea that politics is all that matters or is always the most important thing is destroying what's in this picture. That's why we have to put politics in its place, because politics has a place. It serves other human goods. Takeaway. I have not denied that democracy, democratic politics are really important. That hasn't been my message. I haven't said, get out of politics, forget about it, it's a waste of your time. Democracy is important. Justice is important. Equality and freedom and autonomy, these are all important things. I haven't been denying that. What I've been trying to convince you of is that democracy makes it possible for us to live together well. And that's what explains its importance. Then I've tried to convince you that in order to do democracy well, we have to sometimes do things together that aren't about democracy. Now, what those things are is hard to get our mind around. I've suggested starting very small, with a reminder to yourself, with an affirmation to yourself, and then ultimately with an affirmation to your friends and family. Say to yourself, now, before we get embroiled in another contentious political season, before we have to start arguing with each other over Thanksgiving about who to vote for president, do it now. Say to yourself and to your loved ones, family and friends are more important than what politically divides us. At the end of the day, if you do that, I think that's all that there's left to do is to hope for the best. Thank you.